think it's not like the crisis is what sparks us to do the change. It's the matter of some reflection on we've been here before. If you have a community, a part of what makes a community is the social memory. Just think about, in your circle, if you don't have community, how can you create one? Part of that is starting to build those networks, being willing to listen, not just you talking, but being able to listen to what they have to say. I mean, the hardest part sometimes that you can do is just listening. Be present, show up for those, come there for the community, come there for the conversation, come there for support, and to show that these kinds of topics hold value.
Welcome to the On Air podcast. This podcast is a program of the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges Diversity Matters Initiative. The podcast explores various issues related to diversity and inclusion in the veterinary profession and provides the AAVMC an opportunity to offer ongoing diversity programming to our member institutions as well as all veterinary professionals. My name is Dr. Lisa Greenhill, and I am the Chief Institutional Research Officer here at the AAVMC. So for some people, this time that we are kind of in right now in the US is a time that is really kind of fraught and high anxiety filled, right? Not for everyone, but certainly there is a population for whom that is their lived reality. And folks are really responding in a myriad of ways through numerous kinds of activities, including, but certainly not limited to, targeted boycotts, protests, advocacy visits to state and local and also federal legislators, letters, and then there's always the keyboard warriors that are just out there doing their thing on all of the social media platforms. And this is all very interesting to kind of watch. It can be upsetting for some folks, and some folks are like, why is this even happening? But a few months ago, a colleague reached out to me, and they were asking for some advice on what to tell DVM students right now that might be struggling. Like what do I tell them? What guidance do I give them? And I told him without hesitation, this is the time to lean into and build community. That is the only real true path forward, is trying to find and build community. And even now, a couple months later, I still stand by that. And certainly it is one way that I deal with my own kind of emotional issues around life and politics and all of those kinds of things. And so I think that this is something that we all need to talk about, because not everybody seems to understand what is meant when we talk about building community or finding community. We do when we are talking about things like affinity organizations, other kinds of organizations, not just kind of affinity by demographics, but really trying to find our place in this world and find our people, if you will. So I thought it would be a great conversation to have with my wonderful friend and colleague, Dr. Latonia Craig from the AVMA. Welcome to the show, Latonia.
Hey, everybody. How's everybody doing?
All right. So why don't we dig in? Hopefully folks know you, but as is our custom on the show, tell us a little bit about your background, Dr. Craig.
All right, I'm going to be really brief because I want to spend all the time on the conversation. So I am AVMA's current Chief Diversity Officer at AVMA. It'll be 3 years in August since I've been in this role. Prior to this role, I served as the Assistant Dean for Inclusive Excellence at Purdue University, and have done a lot of work in this space for over 20 plus years, also serving as a part-time instructor for the University of Louisville, teaching on subject matters of introduction to Pan-African studies and hip hop and social movements. And so very excited about today's topic.
Great. So we talk about these things a lot as colleagues and as friends. You are one of my people in my community that I lean on. So what do we mean when we say this is what the focus should be? We should be building community within vet med.
Yeah, so I won't lean into saying that there is a one size fits all for what community means, because it means different things for different people, and people need from it, different things. When people think about community, sometimes they think about people within their local area that they can touch, feel, see somewhere. But honestly, the simple way of community is finding those people who will stand with you, especially stand with you on hard times, pour into you. Remain somewhat optimistic when it feels like you're empty and you just need some sort of connection or bring clarity to the matter, and finding those people who can build camaraderie around purpose. That's kind of how I look at community. And you're also a part of my community group too. So
Yeah.
we meet each other every week and lean
Every
into
week.
each other every week. And so it's good to have consistency. Consistency is key with community.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And I think that it's interesting because I think that maybe a lot of folks, not everyone, because I think that folks dealt with the pandemic years somewhat. There's a lot of emerging research about how we kind of dealt with that, but we also kind of came out of it with the Surgeon General saying we had an epidemic of loneliness, right? So, during the pandemic, I know for me anyway, it was like, this is a very stressful time. It's very difficult. I feel very isolated. I love my daughter, but we're trapped in a house together and it's just us. And I need more, right? Like, I need more. And so, I really started cultivating some of my friendships that maybe, you don't mean to neglect, but you just don't have the time, right? And so, these are the things though that even if you're not in constant contact, that like little kind of reach out, like, hey, I'm thinking about you, or how you doing, or I'm just wishing you well, or whatever. Like, I think that when we talk about building community, as much as it is those people standing in the gap, it starts literally the bar is on the floor. Send somebody a text message, like pick up the phone and call them, like a post on social media, like and DM them. But the initiating kind of part of it is really, really easy, but we actually tend to make it a little bit hard on ourselves, right? And part of that is because the challenges that we're experiencing, whether they are economic, whether they're social, whether they're health, whatever they are, seems so burdensome that it's hard for us to kind of just do the little things.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think we have to get to a place where we're normalizing just checking in on folks. And also understand that even if you're connected with the community, they may not all have the answers at once. And sometimes we lean in on community to tell us exactly what to do. And really, community is about everybody being a part of the solution. And so don't think of community as something that we have, but really leaning towards something that we do together and
Yeah.
finding those solutions together. Because I think sometimes we get to a point where we start taking a lot, but we're not giving or
Yeah.
pouring into.
Yeah.
So if you're connected with folks, understand that you should be coming with some things too, not just taking what you need to move forward, because that can be somewhat problematic and draining for the
Mm.
community as a whole. But
Might
definitely
get you
check in
evicted too.
as a basic part.
If you're only taking from community, it's gonna get you evicted. Like
It is. We're gonna stop adding you on the thread, and you will not be a part of the Zoom calls. So
So, but how do the challenges of life impact, I guess, our need for community, right? Like we've already established that it does, but and what are some of the different ways that community can be built, right? Because so we've talked a little, we've kind of leaned in a bit to, hey, do the text message or, the Zoom, the monthly Zoom or whatever, weekly, whatever it is. Those are certainly some examples, but there are also even bigger kinds of examples, smaller. I mean, again, it's not a one size fits all. There's lots of different ways.
I think one thing that we should always take away is that community has to be fluid, and being willing to adapt and flex in some situations. And I think I will use the example that you gave with COVID. We learned a lot of things through COVID, and what we learned through crisis is we learn those things that we have not really paid attention to. It's like our fault lines become exposed. And so what we learned from the pandemic is, okay, if we are in a crisis where we all go into social isolation, what kinds of resources and means do we have to ensure that everybody has access? And it was through talking with each other did we start talking about, hey, well, if the schools end up having to be isolated for 2 weeks, there are students that don't have computers, there are students that don't have internet access. And even internet access is not equal. You've got some folks that have a standard line of access, but then you have some people who are using their phone as a hotspot. There's all kinds of things that we learned through that process. And so I think even with the Great Depression, I think you and I had spoke briefly about the Great Depression. That was during a time where there were a lot of men that were being laid off work. The economy was, tanking. And then this was a time when, before the Great Depression, women were relegated to home life. They were not really allowed to contribute to the workforce. But when all of this happened, they started thinking of innovative ways to bring women into the fold, and some of them became breadwinners. And they realized that they could be meaningful contributors to the economic status of the nation. And so I think in those moments is when we figure out innovative ways to do things, definitely remain fluid. And I think we also have to, I think it's not like the crisis is what sparks us to do the change. It's the matter of, okay, some reflection on we've been here before. It's the, if you have a community, a part of what makes a community is the social memory that it has. When you can reflect on, how did we get through something similar before? How did we come up with ideas? How did we implement it? Who was at the lead or at the head, or who can be at the head of this given the experience? And I think if we come together as a think tank and we put all of those things on the table, that allows us to come out better on the other side.
Yeah, so you've got my neurons really just sparking here because, there are certainly folks that I'm in community with, and I'll keep it 100, like a lot of fellow African Americans, a lot of other folks of color that are kind of really having big feelings right now, big feelings. And, there's a part of our discourse in these big feelings that are like, hey, we have survived worse. We're not trying to run it back, but we've survived worse. And somehow together we will get through this, right? And that has been a consistent theme across a number of kind of like my support systems, the communities that I am a part of, and that social part of that is that social historical, that memory piece of surviving and thriving in the midst of, right? And I think that that folks don't think that, I mean, one, when you're surviving, you don't necessarily think about thriving, right?
Mhm.
You might think about it almost from a literary, like, I want to stop surviving so that I can actually move towards a thriving existence. But the two actually do coexist in for a lot of us, right? Thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's the thing about community, right? Is it redistributes that emotional burden that you might carry so that you're not going at it alone. And the community can step in those spaces where You may not have it in you, but we do somehow. Let me carry this torch with you. Or how about you just let me just be a sounding board for you, and while others of us move on. There's ways in which you can redistribute tasks when you're going through crisis. And I think that's important, that everybody doesn't have all the answers, but there's something that somebody can do. And sometimes that means categorizing it and putting things in compartments, and having little pockets of safety across that community. I think those things are certainly important. But I think the key there is that you're not alone. There are
Yeah.
other people who can share responsibility with you. And I think that's key, because I think we want to come out stronger, and we certainly want to come better than when we entered. But we certainly want to be more prepared when we leave.
Yeah. And so, are there, well, I'm going to bring this back to specifically vet med in a minute, but what about some pre-existing community, like, that community structures? And I don't mean structures necessarily as buildings, but just kind of here organization kind of things. But, are there groups or structures that become more or less relevant during these kind of times when people are, again, having big feelings? And I'm saying, I want to be very clear and transparent that not all of our listeners are having a bad time, right? And so I want to acknowledge that, without judgment. And I also want to acknowledge that people are also having really big feelings about it without judgment. So this is one of the reasons why I'm using the language that I'm using. Um, but, what becomes, I guess, what do we toss to the side and what do we cling to in moments like this? I mean, we know that community is a thing that we cling to, but really in a very concrete way, what does that mean? And what things do we just kind of like, yeah, that's not important?
So I can tell you from, I think the best way to answer that is from my own experience. What
Yeah.
has been sort of a lifeline for me, outside of the conversations that we have on a weekly basis, I do, especially, over the past few weeks when diversity, equity, and inclusion has been under attack, and it's been on every headline, every minute of the day. I've connected with other chief diversity officers across industry, to talk about what is it that you're feeling like, and just checking in on you. Are you doing okay? What are you all doing in as it relates to? Are you all changing names? Are you all changing titles? What does that look like for you? And what's the rationale behind whatever it is that you decide to do, without judgment? Because what we don't want is coming to a space and asking questions, and then it gets to a point where you're interrogating an individual who's sharing with you where they are, and they're in that process factor, because we don't want that, because then it's no longer a safe space to share.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so a part of that is just applauding and supporting whatever decisions that are being made in that circle. I am a very spiritual person. So my church family is also, my community. And this is where I'm leading into prayer, and I'm leading into the word to give me guidance on what I do next. I'm meditating, I'm doing a lot of reflective work, I'm journaling, I'm doing a lot of that. And then also sharing some of the things that may have been revealed to me in that journal process. I'm also in a sorority, I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta. And so I have an ongoing thread of my sorority sisters. Many of them, quite a few of them, are judges. Some of them are attorneys, and so they're sharing how they're looking at things through a legal lens. I've got some other folks in the school district that are being impacted by what's happening in the classroom, what they can teach and what they can't. And so we are sharing innovative ways to get around that. I'm meeting with other folks that are in associations that they may get federal dollars, they may not get federal dollars, and then how they're navigating how they show up for their members in spite of what's happening, politically. And then I have a group of politicians that are telling me what's happening, on that end. So you can have different pockets of community and get different things from those communities. And so just think about, in your circle, if you don't have community, how can you create one? Part of that is starting to build those networks, showing up with consistency, being willing to listen, not just you talking, but being able to listen to what they have to say. I mean, the hardest part sometimes that you can do is just listening and showing empathy and having some sort of moral compass around this isn't happening to me directly, but I do understand how it could impact this individual or this group or this organization, and I want to lean into that and figure out what role I can play in that. And
Yeah.
so start the conversation, meet people at conferences, and then start meeting with them regularly. And people will know if it is disingenuous, if you are really just a part of taking and you just want to say that these people are in your circle and you just want to do some name drops. People will know if it is genuine, and people will know if it's genuine by your actions. If one
Mm.
minute you seem like you want to be in it for the moment, everybody knows who showed up when 2020 happened. Okay. And everybody knows what those folks are doing now. Okay. Because there are folks that really were all in, wanted to learn everything. And then when it really got uncomfortable and it really required folks to do more than listen and then be a part of the work, you start seeing people move away from
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
people will remember that. And
Yeah.
so that means that you can't be surprised if people welcomed you in the space and now are a little bit hesitant about picking up that phone call or answering that text,
Yeah.
because they don't think that you're reaching out from a genuine place.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, yeah, I mean, there are things that I certainly have also done. Certainly I reach out to colleagues, much like you. I have a number of different circles. I am in the DC area and I have a lot of friends that work for the Fed or contractors with the Fed, right? And so like I'm constantly just, staying in touch with them and hey, let's just go grab coffee. Let's do things. And for me, I mean, I've really leaned into, at least for my local community, like physically actually trying to be places, physically showing up whenever I can, because it makes a real difference. And there is something about being in presence, that I love my group text. I love all of those things, and I honestly could not survive without them. However, there is something really cool about being in community in person with people. The other thing is find like some use, make yourself useful
Yeah.
in your contribution. And so, I didn't promote it a lot. Shout out to Mia Carey. But, one of the things that I did in the last month was, hey, I have a little Etsy store. I make stuff and I'm going to make some trans visibility themed stuff because that community is just getting crushed over and over and over again. And so I'm going to do a little fundraiser for Pride VMC. And it made me feel like I had control. It gave me some agency to do something, which feels good because for a lot of us, we feel a little helpless right now, right? And kind of like, oh, what is there to do? Did it raise like tons of money? No, but like I'm like, hey, okay, let me find another group to collab with and do some designs and do some other things because like that little something is something, right? And so finding those types of things that I've kind of let go of is trying to emotionally, well, I mean, I try like I'm like, what have I let go of? Well, I have really tried to also just practice really, really good well-being, thoughts, techniques, and those types of things. And instead of scrolling, I'm gonna go call a girlfriend that I would normally text for weeks on end, and then we get to finally get together. No, I'm just gonna call her. Just gonna call her, and we're gonna be in community. Last month, Latonia and I went to a meeting in Chicago and of chief diversity officers, and being in community in that space was very powerful It was very, very powerful, as she noted earlier, like, "Hey, what are you doing? How are you changing your name? Oh my goodness, like, you're not in that position anymore. Oh, you've gone back to faculty." I mean, all of those kinds of things, just being, again, with your people that really like, there's some mutual understandings of the emotion and the experience that are really meaningful.
Yeah, you said something very powerful there because when you have a community that has stood with you, just getting on a call with that community and somebody saying, "How's everybody doing?" and you could say nothing, and it could just be a, and you can hear, I know," You know, like they have picked up on exactly what that
The
meant.
deep sigh.
Yeah, and sometimes that is such a relief because I don't have to go through explaining what
Yeah,
I'm feeling and what I'm going through, and I don't have to take you through the stories and what happened and the impact. You just know.
right.
And when you've developed those relationships, and you bring up a very good point about technology, I think technology is great for what it is, but it cannot replace human connection. It cannot replace relationships. I think the ones that in those moments, it's not to say that you can't be vulnerable on Zoom. You absolutely can. But I will say that those individuals that I have been vulnerable with on Zoom, I've already established a relationship with outside of Zoom. It was never sparked, through this
Yeah,
communication if we've just
right.
met in this way. It's because we've developed and deepened, invested in the relationship outside of technology. And so I do love it for what it is. It grants access, and it does expand our reach, but it ends there as far as what it can provide. I think we still have to put in the work of, this being of substance and of
Yeah.
being more than what it is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, yeah, being in community doesn't always just mean kind of pebbling people
Yeah.
with memes and stuff, though that is a part of it, I will absolutely acknowledge. But, finding opportunities for upliftment, finding opportunities for collaboration, finding opportunities to, be keyboard warriors or protest or build a bank or whatever. During my conversation with my colleague earlier this year, I was talking about, some physical communities like Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Greenwood, or where, communities, historical communities of African Americans that were frankly just leveled due to racism and white supremacy. And I remember my colleague saying, "Well, but then the community was gone." And I was like, "Ah, no, that was just a physical manifestation of the community." Like, was it terrible that it got burned down? Absolutely. No question. And there is an absolute huge impact there. But that actually doesn't kill community.
No, not at
And
all.
oftentimes it has the inverse impact of actually strengthening the community and the resistance to those negative external forces around the community. And so, I don't feel like you have to physically go to a thing, but finding ways again to commune with other like-minded folks that help you protect your peace too, you know? And again, as a group or even, you find your own way of developing a sense of agency that helps you feel more in control during periods that seem very out of control, seem very where again you get those feelings of like hopelessness, and you get the feelings of just demoralization, all of those things, harm, right? you know get the group together and put on some theme music.
Yeah, I think I always my reference point is always, because I teach Pan African Studies,
Right.
my reference point is always the civil rights movement. A lot of their work, they had to become really quick strategists. And a lot of their work would happen in the church. And that's where they would come up with, okay, what is happening as it relates to policies, and what is it that we can do as a community to have, impact. And when a community is so strong, even the thought of folks gathering together can be seen as a threat to folks that are trying to tear down the community. And an example that we can give to that is a lot of people don't know that when the 1963 March on Washington happened, there was a threat of another March on Washington happening in 1941. And A. Philip Randolph, he was the head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, which was a Black labor union. He was, Martin Luther King was certainly a microphone
Yeah.
for the movement, but there were folks behind the scenes that was really putting the pieces together, and A. Philip Randolph was one of them. And there was a threat because at that time, there were the military; they weren't allowing Black soldiers to participate. There was job discrimination was happening at an alarming rate, and A. Philip Randolph started putting out that there was going to be this March on Washington of 100,000 people. And you have the president, who at that time heard about this. And because of that threat of the community coming together to do this, he issued an executive order. And that executive order stopped segregation in the military. It also stopped segregation with job discrimination. Now, that executive order did not have a lot of clout to be reinforced. But what we take away from that is this community was so strong and so powerful that the thought of them communing and being in one space to come up with ways to fight against it was enough for the administration to do whatever it had to put that to a halt. Now, the March on Washington ended up happening 20 years later, but that's how powerful it can be, especially if folks remain consistent and that community remains in place even when things seem like it's going in the right direction, that they come back together to kind of figure out ways to address it. That means something to me. And I think that's when we get to that idea of, I know that there's a lot of stigma around the word resilience, because, when we talk about resilience, we talk about bouncing back. But resilience, in a true sense, is about bouncing forward. And so
Mhm.
it's not just staying in one place and then just you were able to go through it, but it's about what were you able to do as you move forward, as you're recognizing that inequity, as you recognize that that is a toxic culture, you need to do something about it. That's true resilience.
Yeah. Yeah. I will allow it because I have issues with the use of the term resilience in in vet med because we think of it as such a long-term thing, and true resilience is how you bounce back or bounce forward, right? But like if it's a protracted episode,
Yeah.
I'm now starting to go back to, guess what, DEI folks, the word tolerance, right? Because you're tolerating this thing, and it doesn't mean that you can't move forward, but the episodes are so persistent that it is the environment. It becomes the environment, right? It's not just episodic. It is literally like boom, 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 boom. And I think that for some folks, that's kind of, what they're feeling right now, right? Like here in DC, regardless of your political affiliation, we kind of have this we've kind of been grafted into or created that there's a local culture now where it's like, okay, Fridays, everybody used to be like, yo, it is Friday, who TGIF. But now we're like, it's Friday, there's gonna be another news cycle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like we also need to check on our local friends and family and colleagues or whatever who, do work for the Fed to see if they still work for the Fed. All of these kinds of things, right? And it kind of is a bit of a downer, but you've raised this piece that gets at what I kind of talked about earlier, where it's like, hey, when we actually do come together, we can certainly make change, but also when we come together, we are much more likely to survive and get to that change, right? To experience that change in a meaningful way. So bringing it back to vet med, I want to be really clear that this is like for folks that are curious, affinity groups are community. Like they're designed to offer community. Your organization, AVMA, is supposed to offer community for veterinarians. AAVMC offers community for folks who are academicians in vet med, right? This is that we are community bodies. But that also doesn't mean that the one community that you're in serves all your needs, right? And so for folks that is like, why would I need to be in MCVMA or Pride VMC or NABV, all affinity groups when I'm in, AVMA? And I'm like, because AVMA they care about those things, but that's not what they focus on. The lived experience of those folks is not, that's not their jam. They care, but that's not their jam, right? And so you create community to really do those things. But at an even more local level, Latanya, like what or how can veterinary leaders support these inclusive supportive communities to be created and to thrive as we all look to ways to address the needs of the profession.
Yeah, so what I will say there, I certainly want to acknowledge some of the spaces that you've mentioned. And even in industry, if you've got some
Yeah.
industry folks on here, there are employee resource groups and business resource groups. You can create that community. Now, when it comes to crisis or we're trying to figure out an executive order that may impact us in some sort of way. When you're thinking about those things, in order for you to create inclusive spaces, you always have to move with intentionality. And a part of moving with intentionality is asking questions about this is an issue that is going to impact us in different ways. And when we come up with solutions, we've got to come up with solutions by thinking of those individuals that are at the margin, not those that are in the middle. So who will be impacted by this particular policy in a different way? Who will feel the pain more, than any other group or
Yeah.
individuals? And I think if you can lead with that, that will help reinforce some of what you need to do and the kinds of community and voices that should be at the table. Who's not at the table? Who are we not acknowledging? Who should be included to be a part of this work? Now, understand that even leading with intentionality, sometimes it can cause harm when we don't think about all of the ways in which we're creating that inclusive space. I'm going to give you a prime example. And
Yeah.
this is not necessarily just vet med. This is not vet med related, but I'm sure people can think of their own reference point. I had an opportunity to speak with, it was a nonprofit here in Louisville, Kentucky. They were trying, it was a center, not going to name their names, but you can figure it out when I give you the example. They wanted to provide parenting resources to their community. And where the center was located, there was like, we're going to have all these free parenting workshops and all these different things because people are asking us about, different things. I have a child who might be dealing with autism and what are the resources there? Just all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Well, this center was located in a neighborhood where the individuals living in that neighborhood largely spoke Vietnamese. There were Somali speaking individuals, a lot of different languages. Well, the resources they were providing were in English,
Wish.
all of them. And so while the intentionality of building community and creating inclusive spaces was great, the the messaging that you sent was access to these resources was not going to be important enough to consider those folks that spoke other languages. And so language diversity was an issue that this group had to come to grips with. How can we provide access and make sure that everybody can benefit from this great resource we have? But they ended up reinforcing harm because it excluded groups of
Right.
people. And so sometimes you really, and you have to be open to, if somebody brings this to your attention, not getting so defensive when you're trying to be truthful, because a part of community is it allows for truth telling. And when you
Yeah.
can provide that truth, it needs to be a safe space. And you as a member of that community, what you are committing to is to uphold that safe space and to be able to hear it and exchange how you've heard it and give feedback in a way that still lands with care. And so hearing with care and giving feedback with care is important. And I think we learned that they learned that the hard way, the center did, when we had to have a conversation around, okay, who are you excluding here? So as a leader, understand people may bring things to your attention because sometimes we get so caught up in the way it looks and it looks so good, it's great. But we don't want to hear the hard part about it. And that hard part is what's going to really take that initial thought and idea to a bigger and better place if we are willing to hear the feedback.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a social contract there,
Yeah.
right? There's a real social contract there where if you are in community, if you've done the work to kind of build community, to find those folks, to reach out to those folks, imagine that it is your clinic staff, right? Your hospital staff.
Yeah.
Um, and they're yeah, everybody's there. It's a job, da 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 da. It's your career for some, for others it may be a job, but while you're there, you are in community, and there are some social contracts that maybe we don't ever articulate or explain. But when you bump up against the boundaries,
Yeah.
right? When you bump up against the boundaries because there's going to be an emotional kind of response. And so the other thing about community is also really learning and leaning into conflict resolution within the group, right? Because again, it's about moving a community forward and offering support and so along with that comes some conflict resolution because we're also not going to be always on the same page
Oh, yes.
about what the solution is. There
Yes.
is the continuum of let's burn it all down like, and
Yeah.
start over. And there's the population that is like, a lot more interventionist where it's like, okay, we're gonna make the changes that we can in the current system, right? And then there's a whole bunch of stuff in the middle, a
Yeah.
whole bunch of, interventions that lead to incremental change, right? Now, everybody in the community wants more than incremental change. Keep that in mind too. But in terms of the actions and the expectations around some of those social contracts, they're going to be communities have space for that entire continuum, and it does have to be managed, right? Not everybody is gonna get along, right? It is its own kind of social media universe. Like just the way you see these things pop off and on Blue Sky or Twitter or Facebook or whatever in the comments section, that's also what we see in offline communities as well. And we need to manage it. But as a part of that contract, everybody has to kind of give a bit to figure out how to move things forward,
Yeah.
you know?
I think sometimes I have heard so many people bash certain communities
Mm.
when they've gone to certain meetings where they're strategizing. And I've heard people say, "Oh, it's just chaotic. Oh, I just couldn't. Everybody was complaining. We just couldn't get on the same page." And sometimes communities will look like that, right? As before you get to the solution, it might be chaotic, and everything may not be as organized as you would like for it to be to come to that solution. Sometimes it's going to take a little bit of grace. It's also going to take patience. It's going to take some self-awareness about what you need to do and work on before you come to a community and can contribute in a meaningful way. And it's also going to take some self-awareness around some of your trigger points, because there are some people who have trigger points when they come to some meetings, and if they start going down certain pathways they may not want to be involved anymore. But if you are truly committed and you really want to stay connected and be a part of the solution, sometimes you got to weather through some of the things that you dislike, and that those parts that make you uncomfortable. It requires that in order to get to that end part. So I do think that that's important. I always look, and I want to go back to your original question, which was about what leaders can do.
Yeah.
I had already mentioned like some of those questions that you ask yourself about who's not being acknowledged. I think the bigger question a leader has to ask is, what would it take in order to include the individuals that are not at the table? What would it take in order for us to center their voices or that individual in this moment. It doesn't necessarily mean that we just change everything for always, but in this moment, there we have to somehow prioritize voices. And you have to ask that bigger question, what would it take for us to center that voice now? And so I look at leaders as sort of like cartographers, is that what we call it?
Yeah.
Cartographers, when they're having to map out um,
Yeah.
who's in the room, who's not, and what kind of strategy do we have to move with in order to make sure that we are casting a wide net. That's a position that you play as a leader. You've got to serve as a cartographer to make sure that our voices are heard.
Nice. So, long-term benefits that really kind of emerge from strong community bonds, especially those. I mean, here's the thing. Many communities are forged because of the challenging periods, right? Like they are, I mean, certainly the type of community anyway that I guess I think we're talking about are typically forged because there are unmet needs. There is witnessing of injustice. There are things that people with certain demographic markers are experiencing as a group, as a community, right? So, what are some of the long-term benefits that emerge from these kind of roses that grow in the concrete?
Yeah, part of it is I had referenced this earlier, which is the social memory. How did we navigate this challenge before? And we bring that social memory up too because we need people to be reminded as to how we got in this place. I think it's more important now than ever as we talk about DEI and some of those things. I just had this conversation with my community, my alma mater, right? Because they were, they're right now they're getting rid of, certain scholarships. Another thing that's on the table is at the university they have cultural diversity requirements, and they are starting to get rid of those course
Mm.
requirements. And the reason those course requirements got there was a series of events, and I was able to bring this up because I was there through all of it when it first started. And the series of events, not to go into a whole list of things, but there was at one point, I'm a Porter Scholars academic scholarship, and there was a student that was being robbed across campus. And when they left the store, they ran onto campus and blended in with the rest of the community. Well, at the time when they were running, another Porter Scholar was running to the orientation meeting, and that they mistook this person for the other person. And a SWAT team rolls into the scholarship room and they draw guns at the individual that they think robbed a store. This is everybody's introduction to the University of Louisville and to the scholarship program. And we're like, what did I get myself into? They ended up being a silent protest. There was a demand for a chief diversity officer at that time. This is over 30 years ago. And then you had another incident happened where this used to be a time when what do you call it, credit cards were being given on
Oh,
campus.
yeah.
And in exchange for a credit card is a t-shirt that you would get, kids signing a life away to get a dad t-shirt. And this t-shirt in particular that they were giving away said 10 reasons why a beer is better than a black man. And people see this shirt and they're like, what? They cause an uproar. People see the shirt. The bank that was involved in this ended up saying, these are independent contractors. We have no say on who and what shirt gets sent out at the college. We apologize, but that's not on us. But they did end up taking some sort of accountability, and they developed what was called a diversity lecture series. And that diversity lecture series had $500,000 in it, and they wanted it to be a teachable moment to talk about community and togetherness and diversity and why it's important. Well, the first individual that they brought on campus was Sister Soldier, and someone took a note that she wrote and said basically that she was racist. And this bank said, well, we gave you this diversity lecture series, but it was to bring folks together, not to bring anyone that encourages hate speech. on campus. And so then they take the money back and says, we're not gonna contribute to that. We were trying to create a space for you all to have these conversations. Well, then a couple months later, Tau Kappa Epsilon decides to wear blackface with the noose around their neck and in jail attire. And then the bank, and before they did that, the KKK, the master of the KKK, decides that since this soldier was invited, that their Grand Master should be able to speak on campus. And so Tau Kappa Epsilon happened after that. And then the bank came back and said, y'all got a lot of problems. We're going to give y'all this money back. And and what they did with the money is they developed the cultural diversity course requirements. And all of this was as a result of all of these things happening. And now we're at a point where they're going to take away the cultural diversity courses. And
Mm.
so we had to have a conversation around the reason why this came to be. It wasn't just because people felt it was a nice thing to do. It was necessary. It's necessary now. And these are the benefits that we get from it. And so that social memory is so important, because if people weren't there, they're bound to repeat the same mistakes. And if they don't have that kind of institutional organizational knowledge to serve as, or just to inform, it may not be the best solution that you end up with. And so you want to certainly make sure that you've got all things at the table to include other benefits to community. There is power in numbers. There is power in if you've cast a wide net, you're going to get a great amount of ideas that come from that. That is important. Communities are able to bounce back and serve as a support system for many reasons and many things. I can tell you, I'm sure you can ask anybody and they can tell you a benefit, how they've benefited from being a part of some sort of community, a community that I didn't even mention. This is more of an informal community, but we know we have it. You go to the hairdresser, you go to the barbershop. We're talking politics.
Yeah,
in those
that's
spaces.
not a universal experience. So for
Yeah,
folks
and
that
they may
don't
not.
know, folks
Yeah.
that don't know, I'm gonna have to ask you to explain a little bit about what it looks like in our community to go to get your hair done,
Yeah. So
or as we say, did.
so when I get my hair done, we're talking politics. We're talking about, things that just hit the news. We're talking about headlines. We're sharing stories. We're pulling up news stories. We're showing YouTube videos. We are commenting on all of those things, and everybody is coming at that conversation from the sector of wherever they work. So our teachers are there. There's, sometimes hairdressers are teachers and hairdressers. They've got dual roles or multiple jobs. And so we're talking about that in that space. And then, of course, you've got your older clientele who are your churchgoers that are also influencing the conversation with the word. So it looks different. And so the benefit of being in community, I have felt so drained before walking into that space, but I come out empowered. I come back replenished. I come back with a new sense of direction. I come back with clarity, and I come back with the idea that, you know what, I'm not in this by myself. There's other people who feel the same way I do. And it takes me back to a session that I went to years ago at Virginia Tech, and the session was called I Am Not Crazy.
Yes.
The session was called I Am Not Crazy. And
Yes.
so to be in a session like that, and I'm talking about the room was packed wall to wall. And we all walked around like, yeah, I'm not crazy. Like, I interpreted that the same way that you did. And this isn't in my head. We are experiencing it. And sometimes just naming it or just saying I'm not crazy is enough, is enough. It is enough to just say that.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I'm like, is that before vet med? Because if that was during vet med, I'm mad that I missed a talk on I'm not crazy. But
no, that wasn't vet med. But the beauty of vet med is these conversations are happening, right?
Yeah.
You've got so many sessions, and what I can tell you to do, a lot of the sanctuary, at least for me, I find a lot of sanctuary in vet med when I go to those DEI breakout sessions. Because we're having those harder conversations. You feel the energy in the room. Most of the folks that come there, if not all, are on the same they really genuinely want to
Want to be
be a
there.
part of the solution, and they want to invest. And so be present, show up for those, and even just show up to those, even if it's a session that you've heard millions of times, because there's always some kind of nuance to it. Come there for the community, come there for the conversation, come there for support, and to show that these kinds of topics hold value. Because a lot of folks have to keep defending why sessions like this should happen. And if you come and support, sometimes that's enough. There's a
Yeah.
lot of great speakers in vet med that speak on all kinds of topics that deal with bringing community together. And I think if we can show support by physically being there, that can be
Yeah.
you can do.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, there are folks really throughout across the profession that are really trying to build these communities, the affinity groups. There's book clubs on DEI. There's lots of things, and just go, show up. Even, the event that you all hold, live, love,
Yeah,
life.
live life of all.
Okay. Live,
Yeah,
life, love all, right? That is about building community, like, right? It's about bringing people together. So, yeah, you can also have a party, like,
yeah.
but it's about bringing folks together. And
AAVMC, they always
yeah,
have their happy
yeah,
hours. We got the summits that we do now.
yeah.
Find those
Um,
spaces. Look on the when you register, what is happening where, and come to those
and
spaces.
come to those spaces, absolutely. Because the more the merrier. Don't worry, you can always order more chicken wings. But if you miss the chicken wings and got there late, like sometimes I do, it's okay because I'm not really there for the chicken wings anyway. I'm
Yeah,
really there for the people. So we're just about running up on time. One thing that I'll also encourage folks in the profession is, look to some of these animals. Like my dog Barkley. I know lots of you all know about my precious baby, but he is the happiest go lucky. Like he is in community with everybody he comes into contact with. Of course, that doesn't involve usually their pets, but he is really a people dog. But what I've learned from him is that I can end up being in community just in my neighborhood with people I never would have spoken to. I'll admit it. Like, I mean, my dog goes up to everyone.
I love that.
He goes up to everyone, including some of the less savory people in the area. But you know what? Like I have developed relationships. There's a unhoused lady who lives in my neighborhood and comes and my dog is 10 years old. And when he was a puppy and I was walking him, that's when I connected with Miss Sharon. And I don't know if she will ever come inside. But what I do know is that when you outstretch your hand to a number of people, and there's an entree, like Barkley is my community broker, like,
Yeah,
but a lot of these people in my neighborhood that yeah, I might have had empathy for, and I might have, done some things, but like to literally have conversations with, to be in community with, to ask how they're doing and genuinely mean it, to see, another neighbor that is really, really having a hard time. I saw him like out walking yesterday, and I was just like, I wonder, should I call somebody for a welfare check? Because I'm kind of worried about him. Like, that's community,
yeah.
right? And honestly, I have my dog to thank for that. I do. I have my dog to thank for that because I have learned so much about letting go of judgment
Yeah.
from my pet that I tell people, I'm like, yeah, he, he might be judgy about me and my ability or desire to give him the amount of treats he wants, but outside with people he loves everyone, and I have benefited long term, especially during the pandemic, like when we walked and walked and walked and walked. We took so many walks, and I learned so much about finding community in my neighborhood in a way that I hadn't in almost 20 years. And so you can find it, you just have to look for it. And then you have to, be empathetic, find ways of connection, find ways of being active, including active listening, and finding ways of feeling like you have agency, however big or small. But get with people, especially in a profession where so many people have said, well, I went into vet med because I ain't like people.
Oh God, I know. I hear that so often. I
We need
know.
you to get with the people.
Yes, you got to get with the people and be encouraged that if the community, if you don't feel that there is a community right now that you can get engaged in, then I hope that you are encouraged to start one. That you can be the lead of starting that community and putting people in that group that you all commit to meeting, more often. It is not about, how long that sort of infrastructure has been there to determine if it's going to be effective. It's really about if the community has the capacity to address collective needs. That is what a community is. And so if it can do that, by all means create your own and add those people in there. You certainly don't want to duplicate efforts where there's the same people in 6 different groups. Find out what's there, and if it's not there, then perhaps that's something that you could start.
You can do it. You can do it. Yes. I think we'll end there. That's a great, great sign off. So, Latonia, my friend, my colleague, thank you.
Yes, thank you for having me. Always
Thank
good
you.
to
Thank
talk with
you.
you.
Yeah. And so, I will also say that my community of colleagues and friends within vet med over the years has just grown and grown and grown. And there are definitely have been seasons where I'm for more, maybe in aligned with some over others. It's not a bad thing. It's just seasonal. Like there's these seasonal moments. But I will say this, that like Latonya and I've been rocking the whole time. We
Yeah.
talk often, we text often, we send each other silly things. And part of it is one, I think we just jive well, but the other is that we are in community and we understand the work that we do, its importance, its relative importance within the profession, but we have shared lived experiences that are really, really meaningful in the ways in which we think about problem solving, and the ways in which that we think about conflict resolution, all of those kinds of things. We're very different, but we have a lot of shared experience. And so that's just another example. So to my wonderful community person, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. So with that, this has been another episode of AAVMC's On Air podcast. Please be sure to like the episodes, leave us comments, and hit us back. Let us know what kind of questions you have, or even future topics. But be sure, whatever you do, to subscribe to the podcast and listen regularly. We've got some new stuff coming in the hopper, some really great topics. So stay tuned. Thanks so much and have a great day.